transformation and to maintain that transformation. So that design includes the vision of society. So it was a new vision of society where there's unity. It's a united nation. So the Constitution in the preamble talks about building a united nation. It talks about a constitution that embraces, a society that embraces diversity, a society where there is democracy, a democratic society. And the key to that society, though, are words such as everyone's potential is freed, everyone's life is improved, and that the society is at peace with itself and it's peace with the world. And we do know that as long as there's injustice somewhere, there can't be sustainable peace anywhere. The constitutional architecture includes values. One of the key values that are important for social justice is the value of equality. In the Constitution, it's presented as an aspirational value, because if you look at Section 1, which is the values section, it talks about the achievement of equality. Sometimes I really don't understand when people talk about a compromise that was made to solidify the status quo. Say, how do people arrive at that perverted logic? When the Constitution, nowhere else in the world does a Constitution talk about the achievement of equality. Even the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of 1948 talks about equality as if it exists, as if discrimination is an aberration. In South Africa, we understood that discrimination was not going to be an aberration for a long time, that we were moving from a premise where there has been the hierarchization of difference in terms of race, in terms of gender, disability, and many other human attributes. And we needed to go on a journey using the Constitution to eliminate the legacy of that injustice. So these values are equality, freedom, human dignity, openness, transparency, democracy, democratic, and the Constitutional Court has also said that Ubuntu is one of our values. This was said in the case of S versus Makwanyane, once one of the early decisions of the Constitutional Court, and it was a decision that ended the death penalty. So you can see how the Constitution is a document that is transformative in its nature, if we allow it to do so. So the Constitution paints a vision of the future. It paints the values that need to cement our walk to the future. It also states the basic entitlements of citizens. And included in those entitlements are fundamental human rights. And these human rights transcend what we regard as civil and political rights. They include social and economic rights, which you will find in from section 27 onwards. A lot of them are in section 27. They include basic rights such as the right to food. So that's a society that would have achieved right to access to food, water, housing, education, health, services, etc. These are entitlements for you just because you're a human being. And the architects of our democracy, though, thought it was not enough to paint a vision, values, and basic entitlements of citizens if you were going to retain the character of the state as it was during apartheid. So our Constitution provides a new framework for the character of the state. And among the provisions on the character of the state is Section 195, that talks, for example, about the fact that the public service should have the highest level of professional ethics. Highest level of professional ethics. I know you're laughing because there's so many people that are not aware that that's a requirement under Section 195. And key to that, obviously, is that you can't have the highest level of professional ethics once you're in the public service. It means when you recruit into the public service, you should recruit on the basis of that highest level of professional ethics. Section 96 imposes basic ethical requirements for members of the executive. These include preventing a conflict of interest, not using your power and resources of the state to advantage yourself or to advantage any other person. Right. Right. But, dear colleagues, there's one section in the Constitution that we don't cite enough, but I believe that from the point of view of social accountability in civil society, we should leverage that section in the Constitution. It's Section 237, because it says we should put the Constitution first and deliver on constitutional responsibilities diligently. So if people, for example, prioritize flimsy things because there's going to be a deal that has a lot of potential, I don't want to go there. We are here about social justice. What we can leverage there is this in line with the priorities that have been set in the Constitution? And those priorities are those Bill of Rights priorities in Chapter 2 of the Constitution. Well, some of those priorities are not in Chapter 2. For example, by the Constitution saying that the public protector must be accessible to all persons and communities, it gives a right to complain to every citizen or person in this country or elsewhere. Anybody who has been aggrieved by state action has a right to complain. So automatically, it means the state has a responsibility to provide resources so that the public protector can execute your right to complain. So that becomes a priority.
Well, former public protector Thuli Madonsela, they're really explaining the responsibility of making
the character of the state basically is, if you look at Section 195, Section 96, Section 139, and Section 237, you can arrive at a conclusion that the state has to be competent, it has to be ethical, it has to be integrated, and it has to be responsive and accountable. So that's the character of the state. The state also has to be transparent and open. It's all there in terms of the provisions of the Constitution. Finally, part of the architecture of the state includes innovative institutional architecture. And some of the new institutions are the Constitution, the Public Protector, the Human Rights Commission, etc. You probably know about a very famous quote attributed to President Nelson Mandela. He said this in 2000, in the year 2000, when he was speaking to public protector-like institutions. He said, "Even the most benevolent of governments have among them people with propensities for human failings." And That's why we've had built within the architecture of our democracy various safeguards, and these include innovative institutions such as the Power Protector, Auditor General, Constitutional Court, etc. When we look at how we're fared as a democracy, we've got to look at all of that, whether we have worked within that architecture. But basically, it means that if the state is functional, it would have to be driven by the vision, the values, the basic entitlements of citizens, the character of the state, and all of these innovative institutions, including those that are there to ensure that there's accountability and that there's no impunity for wrongdoing within government. But accountability is not just about impunity, though. It's about building trust. It's about making sure that citizens feel engaged, that they feel that they can call to account whoever is within the state, they can expect an answer, and that when something has gone wrong, there could be redress. But where are we then with social justice? And if we focus on the issue of structural inequality, which is a legacy of apartheid and poverty. Stats SA provides the following statistics. The majority of South Africans are poor. That is 50.5% of people in this country are poor. If you think that's not bad enough, divide South Africa into the 4 racial categories. You get this. 64.2% African people, those who are classified as African, are poor. 64.2%. 41.3% of those classified as coloreds are poor. 5.2% of those classified as Indian or Asian are poor. And 1% of those classified as white are poor. Right. All right. Dear colleagues, I'm giving you the statistics not for incitement. I'm giving you the statistics for us to go into this journey. So let's just listen to each other, and then we'll get a sense of where is this going to. Unemployment is at about 27.7%. The needs are at about 25%. If you add the needs and the unemployed, you get about 50%. The needs are those who are not in employment, not in education, and not in training. The Gini coefficient for South Africa is at about 0.9. Normally they say a good Gini coefficient should be closer to 0. That is basically the gap between the rich and poor. Normally when we measure economic progress or development, we use GDP. And I've just realized that it's a new thing. We didn't always measure progress with GDP. And GDP, whilst it's good to give you a sense of whether we're progressing or not, but it doesn't give you a sense of what is the distribution of opportunities, resources, and burdens in society, which is social justice. So you could be doing extremely well with your GDP, but only to find that there's one village where there's 0% employment. There's one village where there's 0 development. I just came back from a village called Emanzimeleni, close to Mpange. The average person is unemployed. The one hospital they had during apartheid has been downgraded to a clinic, and grown men were almost in tears about the fact that they used to have their feet fixed there if you broke a leg, if you broke a toe or something like that. Mothers were talking about the babies they delivered at that clinic, and that none of that is possible today. And then an old man said the only development they've received since democracy was a toilet that requires you to go backwards in order to go in because it's too small for you to go in front face. So that's the case of GDP would not tell you that. It would take the earnings of the top 1% of this country that owns the bulk of the economy and mix it with the earnings of Balisa Musa, who, because she was arrested on June 16, was not able to be educated and her economic situation is poor. And it would divide that and give you an average. So that it becomes important then that we use the Gini coefficient as well. Now, that's a question to me is how socially, a question from me, dear colleagues, is how socially just are we today? If we look at these figures, you would agree with me that it doesn't look like we are socially just yet. If you go to gender, you will find that women bear the burden of looking after disabled, older persons, and even disabled persons. But of all of the statistics that we got on gender, the one that I would like to share with you tonight is that it is said that there's 200,000 families that are headed by children under 15 in South Africa. We talk about child-headed households, but children go up to 18. But just talk about under 15. And most of the people who are heading those families are girls. Because when the going gets tough, a lot of the young boys would rather choose to become street children or go away and work. That statistic is mentioned about burdens in society because the vision says we should be creating the society where everyone's potential is freed. I attended a nutrition conference organized by one of the Stellenbosch units at Tygerberg Hospital. Again, we were told that a lot of children from historically disadvantaged communities are growing up now with underdeveloped brains. And they said that's happening because of nutrition. So when we dealt with Fees Must Fall, my concern was that some of the children at the University of Pretoria went without food for days, and most of the times they ate bread for a long time. So the concern was just we need people to have food, but it turns out that it's not just food you need, it's nutrition. So this new constitution promises everyone a fair start in life, a fair chance to be the best you can be. But these children, are they getting a fair start in life? Can they rise and become the equivalent of Einstein? AIMS is one institution I'm a member of, or I've just joined their board, which is the African Institute for Maths and Science. run by Professor Turok. But if some of these kids are not getting nutrition at that early stage, even if you have an institution such as AIMS that offers them an opportunity to come when they're ready to go to university, they'll never reach that stage. Right. Land. Right, sorry. According to the Department of Land Affairs, 75% of land in South Africa remains in white hands. 73% of agricultural land remains in white hands. Anecdotal evidence shows that most of tribal land remains in the hands of men. Dear colleagues, when we're dealing with social injustice and when we're dealing with the dream of social justice, we're looking at fairness and justice for all. Not just in terms of color, but in terms of gender as well, in terms of age and everything. In one village that I will not mention, because we're still going to engage with them, we discovered something that shocked me. I worked a lot on gender issues, and I used to work with the Rural Women's Movement when I was a researcher at Wits. And I'm an expert on customary law. Okay. That was not meant to brag. Although Professor Tanda Bantu-Nhlapo and I are responsible for chapter 12 and some of the provisions there, the reason I'm mentioning this is that I was horrified that in that village, according to the information we got, there is expropriation without compensation. There's land expropriation without compensation every day. They said it happens in two ways. The first way is the Indunas and some of the Amakosis say that if your land is not utilized for 2 years, it reverts back to the Induna or the Nkosi. Well, I'm still looking for a law that says that, and I did promise them that I'm going to engage with the Department of Land Affairs, because the last time I checked customary law, there was no such a thing. The second thing was that if your father dies, if your father had been given the land, because you have a user right, you have title, which is, it's not ownership, it's a usufruct. You have a right to use. Currently in that place, if your father dies, that right expires with the death of your father. So the one story I was told, which I still have to verify, was that the father died having planted sugar cane. So the sugar cane was still there, and when he was dead, the son then went to inform the Nkosi that he needs to harvest the sugar cane. And he was told that no, the sugar cane is no longer yours. The title is now reverted to Nkosi. If this is true, it's not funny. It's a violation of the Constitution. It's a violation of the law, even the old law, because Section 25, which protects the right to property, it includes all property rights, including rights that are less than ownership. So, but that's a question, are we socially just today? I could go on and on and on about areas of social justice. But one that I should mention, because we're in the fourth industrial revolution, is the question of connectivity. We were in Soweto, Dlamini, where the young people said to us, we are talented and we're ready. And I liked that language, because that's defining themselves positive. And indeed, whilst we were there, they were telling us about a whole lot of businesses that they were running. But one of the problems they have is connectivity. So we're all happy about the fourth industrial revolution, but connectivity is going to exacerbate existing inequality if we don't think about it. And we saw that most universities are now saying applications should be digital, apply online. Some schools, grade ones, also say that. But what happens to the Gogo Dlaminis who don't have access to a computer? I've been to schools where a child has never seen a computer, let alone touch one. So why should you care if there are all these injustices that exist? Why should you care about fees must fall? Well, the flame of democracy is under threat. Do you agree? A lot of citizens are increasingly disengaging from democracy. A lot of citizens are becoming consumers of democracy. We want the politicians to fix it. If they don't fix it, we're going to break something. A lot of them are resorting to extremism. We could all complain and say this is deplorable. I'm sure there's no single person in this room who thinks it's okay to be violent. We know that violence is the language of the disempowered. But it's still deplorable. But if we howl at them, aren't we similar to a person, a captain at sea who howls at the wind? And the wind, will it stop if you howl at it? It's not going to stop. Because as long as there's injustice somewhere, there can't be sustainable peace anymore. Most people, when things go wrong today, ask, what is government doing about it? Isn't it? We ask, what is government doing about it? But what about me and you? Well, there's a young fellow in the 60s, long before God thought about bringing some of you to this world. He was white, he was Protestant, he was middle class, but he was concerned about racism in America. He was concerned about the fracture between groups. It is felt that it was unpleasant and dangerous. He decided to do something about it. And the one tool he had in his hand was poetry. So he wrote a poem, The Cold Within. Has any of you read it? Find it. It's just in summary, it talks about 6 people that happens to be together on a very cold, dark night. Between them, there's a fire that is dying. All 6 of them have a log or piece of wood that they could throw into the fire and get it to burn again. All 6 of them look around. They find somebody in the room they think does not deserve to benefit from their log. And they decide not to use their log to revive the fire. The first one, according to James Patrick Kenny, was white. He looked around, he saw a black man, and he thought, no, this black person can't benefit from my log. The next one saw somebody not from their church. He doesn't even say a different religion, he says church, so which means Christian, and said, this person who is not from my church will not benefit from my log. Then there was a rich person who saw a poor person and thought, lazy poor, they can't get my log. The poor person, not knowing what the rich person is thinking, thought, a rich person can't get my log. A black person looked at all of these white people and saw an opportunity for revenge and said, these people have exploited me and my people for a long time. They're not going to get my log. He kept it. The last person is that person that we all know. We all know one friend or relative will never do anything but for gain, you know? So the following day, according to James Patrick Kenny, they were all dead. And they were all still holding onto their log with their hands still in death, cold. And he says they did not die from the cold without. They died from the cold within. So what can we learn from this poem and the challenge of social justice and the consequences of social injustice? Well, you heard from me already about the pattern of continuing social injustice in the country. You also know that a lot of those people are angry. One thing we know is that when they're angry, they ban anything. Sociologists now have come up with a new term that when people are hungry, they tend to be angry. In Zulu we say, indlala ibanga ulaka. I'm told that it was Bob Marley who came up with this song about hunger and anger. So the new term from sociologists is hangry, that people are hangry. Now, you know yourself that when somebody is hangry, reason flows out of the door. You can engage with people, but reason falls out of the door. I do appeal, of course, to our people who are hungry and angry, not to go around breaking things. Because, for example, in the Western Cape, people burnt a fire station. Now, if we need that fire station, it can be needed by the very same people who burnt it. In this case, you get a sense that James Patrick Kenny should have added a seventh person, the one who doesn't even just withhold their log. They destroy the remainder of the fire because they don't want somebody to benefit. But again, as I've said, social injustice is a reality. Whose fault is it then that it still exists? And does it matter? During Mandela's birthday yesterday, a lot of time was spent on talking about his legacy. Did he sell out or did he not sell out? Will that improve our situation? Imagine if those people sitting around the fire started asking questions. Who's responsible for the fire that is dying? Would they end up with a better fire? No, isn't it? My own conclusion, based on the Constitution, dear colleagues, is that there's no problem with the Constitution. It might not be the most perfect constitution in the world. It's one of the best. There are better constitutions that have been created, such as Rwanda, where, for example, democracy does not mean only people who are elected. Some groups who maybe people are not going to elect have reserved chairs. For example, young people, people with disabilities, etc. So it might not necessarily be the best. For example, how we articulated the Equality Clause, Section 9.2, I would say we could have articulated it the same as the value of equality, because in the value of equality, we do say equality is still to be achieved. In the Equality Clause, we say equality includes the adoption of measures, but we don't say those measures must be adopted. Why? Because it was obvious. If you say equality includes the adoption of measures to address imbalances of the past, it was a given that that's a substantive notion of equality. If you don't include the addressing of imbalances of the past, then you're not going to achieve equality. But perhaps that could have been made obvious. But that's not a train smash. All I'm saying is it's something that we can all talk about and understand. Where then does the fault lie, and whose fault is it? I'm sure a lot of you would like me to say it is whoever was the president in the last few years. Well, dear colleagues, I'm going to take away your cheese in that regard, because according to the Constitutional Court, in the EFF versus Speaker of the National Assembly, a case decided on the 31st of March 2016, the main culprit is Parliament. According to the Auditor General, the main culprit is Parliament. Because democracy, the architecture of our democracy is such that you have guardians of democracy, various levels. The courts are the ultimate guardians of democracy, but Parliament is the second ultimate guardian of democracy because they perform oversight. So the Constitution has a very clear vision, has a very clear architecture on how that vision is going to be achieved, and there's a lot of laws that have been passed during the Mandela Parliament to give meaning to that vision. So in the case of EFF versus Speaker of the National Assembly, the Constitutional Court, as the ultimate guardians of democracy, basically rebuked Parliament for failure to perform oversight, for failure to uphold and protect the Constitution. The case was about the powers of the power protector, but the real deal was around, it was a breach of ethics. There was a failure to act ethically on the part of the executive. We said social justice is about poverty and inequality. It's about eliminating those so that there's a fair distribution and just distribution of all opportunities and resources. In that Nkandla matter that ended up being about the powers of the power protector, there was a huge issue of social justice. can you spend R250,000 on one person's needs with a good conscience? That was the key question. Is that conscionable? Is that ethical? Is that in line with the pursuit of a society where everyone's potential is freed and everyone's life? So the decision of the power protector was that it was unconscionable. And the president had an opportunity to stop it because the Mail and Guardian broke the story in 2009 and we only investigated the matter in 2013. And he could have stopped it. He could have asked questions, he could have stopped it. And then we said he unjustly benefited and should pay some of it. But another social justice story there is that when the funds for Nkandla ran out, money was taken from a project for urban renewal in Durban. This was to create jobs. This was to revive the city center. All of that money was taken to build and renovate someone's house in the name of security. For example, where I said they couldn't have a swimming pool as a fire pool, because they could have had a fire pool at a lower amount of money. I mean, when we went on site to look at the chicken run, a lot of the people who came with us asked, "What is this?" And if you had never seen the movie Chicken Run and seen that tall thing in the movie, you wouldn't know it's a chicken run. And I even asked the architect, "Why this? Nobody has this." They said, "We saw it in England." But resources in England, resources in South Africa. But the essence of this case is Parliament was a guardian of democracy. So Parliament concerned itself with whether or not this is about the powers of the public, whether the public protector has the right to order, which the Constitutional Court eventually said the public protector has the right to order. In other words, his hard power to cause somebody to do something, from cleaner to president. But that was not the issue. The issue was, as members of the Parliament, you have to make sure that Section 195 of the Constitution is respected, that the public service operates with the highest level of professional ethics, that the resources we have in society are used in the public interest. And what would be the public interest? It would be to make sure that Palesa Musa, the woman I spoke about, is enabled to do better. She already runs a business, but she needs assistance to scale that business so that she can have a sustainable income. They should have thought about that money could be used to prevent fees must fall, which eventually caught up with us. The children that we're talking about, who are growing up with underdeveloped brains, could get that money. But Nkandla, about to finish. I selected the extreme. I could talk about many cases from municipalities, from people going to Italy and taking money, being given money in S&T, which is subsistence and travel money. And when they get to Italy, they say, "Please give us more money." And they sent more money. They come back with change, 50,000 rand. And the CFO asks, "What should I do with the change?" And the mayor says, "Distribute it among the leaders of the team." But the money had been taken on the understanding that food was too expensive in Italy. So if you haven't spent 50,000 rand and it belongs to the people of South Africa, logically it should go back. So we wrote a case that said free money for all, and we asked them to pay back the money, and they did. But I'm telling these stories about we all have a role to advance social justice. And if we haven't reached enough progress, it's all these little things that have happened or not happened to subvert democracy. A functional democracy is a democracy that works for all. And according to the Constitutional Court, Parliament had a responsibility to perform oversight. This is the EFF matter. When the state capture matter happened, again, the DA took and others took this matter to court, the Northern Gauteng court came up with the same issue, that Parliament had a duty to oversee, to make sure that constitutional obligations are met. But it also said the President and the Executive too have to ensure that they keep their obligations, they protect the Constitution. But let's forget about perversion of democracy through diversion of money and just look at some of the things that have not been in the media. Section 25, the land question. Everyone wants expropriation without compensation. In a constitution that talks about building a society where there's justice for all, not just us, you do know that under apartheid, the notion of justice that informed the state was justice is just us. And President Nelson Mandela and his colleagues thought justice should transcend just us. Justice should be justice for all. But Section 25 at the moment has Section 25(8) that allows expropriation without compensation. But if you look at Section 25, there's a lot of room for land reform, for land restitution, and tenure reform. So for me, the main impediment to progress on the social justice front has been poor leadership oversight relating to progress against the constitutional dream and some of our legislative policies. So Section 25, if you just look at the Constitution and say some of the casualties of poor oversight are Section 25 of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. We should have measured whether we were achieving equality on a day-to-day basis. And trust me, I was a public servant during the Mandela days. Every report we made, we were required to talk about what progress are we making on ending poverty and inequality. When last have departments been asked to do that? Bill of Rights. What progress are you making on all of the rights? Not some, all. Because human rights, according to the Vienna Declaration of 1993, human rights are interdependent and interrelated. For example, you can try to make sure that everyone gets equality in the workplace. But if there's no equality in terms of access to health facilities, that will impact on equality in the workplace, isn't it? That's according to Dr. Ntabiseng, a young lady who has come up with a model of Mediclinic-like clinics in squatter camps. because she found that poor people lose out on business and on work because they go and queue in hospitals for the whole day. And then by 3 o'clock, some official don walks around the queue and says, "You are the last person, everyone else must go home." So they come again, and money is involved, time is involved, and they lose jobs. So this young lady, Dr. Ntabiseng, thought what she could contribute would not be to howl at the state, it would be to create these boutique clinics that have doctors and all sorts of things. Human rights. Legislation, I said section 25, Bill of Rights, section 195. The highest level of professional ethics has not been exhausted enough. Section 237, I've already told you, this is one about giving priority to the Constitution. Whilst we're thinking about whose fault and does it matter, we should also think about the casualties of poor oversight when it comes to laws and policies. And if you remember nothing else that I said to you today, please remember this. The Promotion of Equality and Prevention of Unfair Discrimination Act of 2000. Can you believe it? It's 2018. Chapter 5 is still not implemented. So we're looking for silver bullets for systemic problems. Because we are refusing to do it the hard way. The reality is, if there's no oversight on the hard way though, what appears to be silver bullets is not going to be silver bullets. You know that? So section 25, can I tell you very briefly about, chapter 5 of the Equality Act? This is an act that President Nelson Mandela, whose legacy is now at stake, thought we needed. Because he worked with a team, because he was a team leader, he allowed expertise to advise him. And Minister Dala Oma, who was our minister, advised him that it's not enough to ban discrimination, because inequality is not an oddity, it's a systemic problem as a result of the past. But if you were going to end inequality, you needed a systemic solution that looks at all sectors of society. Because apartheid, patriarchy, disability, discrimination, and all forms of previous injustices affected all areas of life. Why should we be beaten by Verwoerd, Bantu Benkosi? Verwoerd understood that if you were going to suppress, you can't tinker in only one part of the system. He didn't just tinker in the economy or employment, which is the only two things we've dealt with in this country in terms of advancing equality. We've dealt with BEE and employment equity. What happens to the rest? What has happened is that people have moved on their own, but there was a vehicle that was created under the leadership of former President Nelson Mandela, the Equality Act, to drive the advancement of equality. And the beauty of Chapter 5 was that it was not coercive. It was asking all companies, all departments, all role players to do an audit of residual inequality, and then on their own move to advance equality. We now complain that we're not moving fast on employment equity. Part of the problem is elsewhere in the system. But part of the problem is mindsets. We don't have a program that looks at dealing with mindsets in society as a whole. The Equality Act would have allowed us to do that. Just to tell you a story about mindsets, my son in grade 5 went to a school where the principal was a very lovely fellow, Mr. Pretorius. And when I was doing homework with my son, helping him with his homework, I came across this passage where it was talking about the people and dangerous elements. So the people, it said, moved from the Cape and they were moving into the inland. And as the people were moving into the inland, they were faced with dangers. Among those dangers were wild animals, snakes, and natives. See, this was during this democracy. This was Glenstacia Primary in Pretoria. How many other people were exposed to this? When I spoke to Mr. Pretorius, he didn't understand that this was wrong. He said, this thing was said. And I then moved my children to Waterkloof Primary. I'm mentioning the story because Mr. Pretorius was a good human being. He had always treated everyone with decency. But what we needed, which we did in many government departments at the dawn of democracy, was a system of social context awareness, where people understand that things we've always taken for granted because of the way you were socialized can be harmful. So had we followed the Equality Act, we would have done that, because some workplaces do this, some don't. Supersport right now, for example, when it had a problem, it rushed to say there's no racism and there's no racial problem. But is it possible, dear God, in a country that was anchored on discrimination? It's not possible. So companies should not be ashamed when gender issues come up, racism issues come up, disability discrimination, xenophobia come up. They should just bring in an expert to assist them to manage diversity. But they shouldn't be all. What about those who are not in companies? Because we're a society of 57 people. What about those who are not in companies? So, dear colleagues, that's the Equality Act. Land reform, I've already said that Section 25 has not been exhausted. That's not enough. The Land Expropriation Act that is a problem today is the 1975 Land Expropriation Act. So Parliament could have changed the Act. The Constitution allowed Parliament, in terms of Section 25(8), to change the Act. And indeed, they tried. They only started around 2009, but 9 years down the line, it's still not done. Health and nutrition policies is an area we haven't dealt with. Schools, one teacher came to me and said, the way we deal with schools is a problem because we treat them financially as one size fits all. And when this teacher said this to me, it reminded me of a colleague at Harvard who came and told us about how they teach, in her organization, they teach little kids about affirmative action. And he said, they just tell these little kids, they tell these little kids to dress in different colors, blue and pink. Then they said to the blue and pink line up, and you all, when we blow the whistle, only the blues should run. The pinks should stand. And then he blows the whistle, and then he lets the blues run. These are 8-year-olds. They run, and the pinks are standing. And then he then says, now, when I blow the whistle, you will be equal. All of you run as fast as possible. So the 8-year-olds, they start crying. But this is not equality. It's the same thing to a country where you had laws that said you can't buy property, even if you have money to buy property. This was our country. When you had a law that said you can't employ a black person in a professional job. If you do so, you'll be arrested. You can't employ a black person in management. Women, they couldn't also be employed in certain jobs. So you would say, but now people are being allowed to do that. But the numbers at the moment create a culture, and culture follows the majority of people in that workspace. They say when we say we affirm excellence, we actually affirm that which we believe is good about ourselves. Because humans tend to be what they call homosocial. So when you're looking for the familiar, and that's how you end up with excellence. That's not excellence. Education, I've mentioned. But the other things that we haven't implemented are not old things. The National Development Plan. How many of you know that we're supposed to end poverty in 12 years' time? No, but the goal was not decided this morning. The goal was decided several years ago. We were then supposed to decrease poverty one step at a time. All I'm saying is, my theory is Parliament has been weak on monitoring, but my theory is also saying we all have been weak on monitoring. Sustainable Development Goals. How many of you know what are those goals? When we did version of the National Development Plan, how many of us know about it, and in what way are we monitoring progress towards it every day? And as part of Agenda 2063, we also have a policy that is called silencing of the guns by 2020, which is in 2 years' time. So you would say there are no guns in South Africa, but silencing of the guns does not mean a real gun. It also includes Vuani not banning. It also includes students, young kids not being closed off from going to school, as is happening in some of the provinces. It's just about peace, because peace is more than the absence of war. Right, and in ending, dear colleagues, I just want to say whose fault is it? Doesn't really matter. What matters is we is the problem. From where we are, the key problem at the moment is there hasn't been adequate monitoring. In addition to that, the problem has been compounded by poor planning. We're doing a project at Stellenbosch University that is trying to assist with poor planning. It's about me and you leveraging our power and privilege to make a difference. I believe that I have power and privilege. I'm educated. I have a relative amount of money. I'm not hungry. My children can even teach at university because university don't pay enough. But if my children were to employ at a university, since they're always asking for money from me anyway, they could teach. Whereas this is real. Some young people can't take a job at university because it doesn't pay enough. So that's an issue of power and privilege. Although I'm one of those people, like all historically disadvantaged professionals who are one paycheck away from poverty, my situation is different from Balisa Musa. It's different from the people of Mbangeni that I went to. It's different from the people of Dlamini that I met. So I have the ability to use my power and privilege to make a difference. You too have that ability to use a power. How can we do that? We can write the next chapter. of South Africa. And in the process, the next chapter of this continent, working together with other people, connecting our lives. And who knows, in doing so, we might write the next chapter of the rest of the world. Because our world is fractured. Because those that we're constantly leaving behind are tired of being left behind. So join us on what we call an M plan for social justice. Part of it is leveraging academic opportunities to assist government with planning. And how will this work? It's just using data analytics to predict the future. So instead of me complaining that when they digitalize, they leave the poor behind, you help them with statistics to predict the future. And virtually walk into the future, and if they realize that they're going to exclude some people, then they can review the policy or include a compensation strategy. So that's what we're doing as part of the M Plan for Social Justice. We're also looking at coordinating input from society to marshal private resources for social justice. Imagine paying R2 every time you went to Checkers towards a national social justice plan. And maybe you're saying, but what about corruption? I've heard people say that about the NHI. Why must we contribute when there's corruption? What's the difference between us and the people who died from the cold within? Because we can bring in these funds whilst being part of social accountability to make sure that the money that government collects through taxes and other avenues is used properly. The M Plan will also leverage resources from the global community. Instead of money flowing that side through IFFs, this time it should flow back this side as part of the M Plan for Social Justice. What is an M Plan for Social Justice? It's really a Musa plan for social justice named after Palisa Musa, because we're saying Palisa Musa's daughter should not end up poor like her mother. We don't want to recycle poverty. And the aim of the M Plan for Social Justice, let's really end poverty by 2030. Let's reduce structural inequality by 2030. But what else are we going to do? Enhance social accountability in society. Make sure that people are their own protectors. They hold everyone accountable. They know who's supposed to be delivering what, with what resources. And lastly, let's work together to make sure that at all levels of society, there is leadership. There is proper democracy leadership. And where do we find answers for proper democracy leadership? From the generation of Nelson Mandela, with Walter Sisulu, Oliver Tambo, and all of those that brought democracy to us. Not just from the ANC, as early as people such as Charlotte Maxeke, Olive Schreiner, and even more recently, Helen Suzman. The one thing I think all of them did well was they always tried to behave ethically. Just at the core of their behavior was a values-driven approach to life. Secondly, they were purpose-driven. What kind of society are we trying to create? They were also impact-conscious. And above everything else, they were committed to serving humanity. And that's what we can say about Madiba. So it's our turn to write the next chapter. Whether we act or we don't act, though, we'll write the next chapter. All we're required to do is to rise to the occasion as they did too. To the university, you bear a higher burden. Young people at this university. Colleagues, lecturers, administration. Because you'll be expected to lead in terms of defining the next chapter and taking society to the higher level. One thing we can say about Madiba and his cohort or his contemporaries is they placed us on higher ground. The second thing we can say is when we were under Mandela's captaincy, he left us on the higher ground we were on when we started. Going forward, none of us, though, are going to be able to do it alone. We're not going to end social justice alone. We will need to connect our lights. Because the Ethiopians say, when spider webs combine, they can even tie up a lion. We tied up the lion that was apartheid. We've even tied up the lion that was state capture. Just a little bit. You will agree with me that we will be able to tie up the lion that is social injustice. We are capable. We must. Because if we don't, democracy is at stake. As long as democracy does not work for all, it is at risk. It is in your hands, as Madiba said. Thank you.
While people are making their way out, please may you do so smoothly, but I would encourage that you don't. You hang on to your seat just a few more minutes, especially if you have burning questions or waiting to listen to some of the questions that people want to ask, and invigorate, really, a moral campus as we move forward. Mamu Thuli Madonsela, Ngalitile describes science as a collection of assumptions. He describes engineering as a collection of questions. But then he further on describes the legal field, as a collection of logics. But I pose the question, are these logics enough to protect our constitution? Are they enough to protect our democracy? And more so, are they enough to self-correct? And tonight, I feel like I got an answer. If it is not the answer itself, it's the invitation to contribute to getting that answer. Thank you so much, and with those words, may we please give another round of applause. Before I introduce Professor Andre Keat for the Q&A session, I'm sure you saw him go like this. It's humility. It's really humility, especially after what I'm about to read and introducing him. I just want to make one small announcement. Well, it's not small, it's quite a big one. Outside, you will have noticed when you were going in that there was a book sale. We're selling a book titled No Longer Whispering to Power, and it is by Tandega Kubule. The normal price is $249, but for students and lecturers, well, I should say the NMU community, Nelson Mandela University community, it'll be going for $224. So please, as you go out, or as you sit and decide whether or not you should be making any purchase this month, please make this one. through Obama's talk on Tuesday, he mentions that Nelson Mandela once said, if you want a chat, put together two people with the same view in one room, and you'll get a chat, a nice banter at it. But if you want a dialogue, put two people with opposing views in one room, people that cannot understand each other, people that don't agree at most. And as we're about to have our Q&A session, as we're about to really engage on the question that we had about the responsibility that we have towards the Constitution, I'm hoping that you're open to opposing views. As you can imagine, we're about to have a dialogue. We're about to engage. And this will be facilitated by Professor Andre Keat, who is the current chair for the Critical Studies in Higher Education Transformation, which is known as CRISHAT, a new role at it. He's a leader in his field, which is transformation in higher education. He designs really and pioneers and thrives at designing African responses to our African problems and African situations. At this, he looks at higher education, transformation, gender equality, and human rights really. He's held a number of positions. But when he was introduced to the university earlier this year, he shared this as his bid to, hey, I'm here, I want to join you, and I'm going to read it for you. He says, I'm particularly looking forward to engaging with students, staff and the broader Nelson Mandela community. All institutions have challenges. So does this one, I'm sure. Nonetheless, I'm on the back of so many advances within the institution over the past decade. Nelson Mandela University is perfectly poised to make further cutting-edge contributions to respond to our national and global challenges across a variety of knowledge fields, including higher education transformation. And then he says, I can feel it in my bones. And I'm hoping that you can feel in your bones opposing views as you're about to engage. Professor Andre Keat.
Good evening, everybody, and you will have to help me. Thanks. 5 sets of questions from the Port Elizabeth Arena, and whilst we are capturing those, I have a colleague, Sigalela, who is just putting together a few questions from the George side. Now, we have Nomta on this side, who will move around with the mic, and Sandizo on that side. Oh, Nomta on that side, okay. Sandizo on this side. Please keep your eyes on me to give you an indication as to who I acknowledge from this side, please. As you know, when it comes to Q&A sessions, people who have not been asked to make the keynote address, they want to deliver it from the floor. Please refrain from that. It's very, very late. We're running, also very late. We have guests that needs to be looked after this as well. So please be brief, be sharp, and be clear. So with that, let me see the set of hands from this audience. I've got that one over there, 2 over here, 1, 2, 3. That's it. Okay? So Nomta, yes. Where is the microphone? Can I just get a sense of what is happening on that side? Oh. So I have that hand, and then please go ahead, sir. Can we just fix the technological glitches here because it's going to create more delays?
Currently, we have public hearings on the land debate. So, you know, in terms of Section 33 of the Constitution, we have the right to fair administrative action, which is whether, I think this study applies in terms of pardon. So, my question to you is, without negating the right to be heard, by whatever is affected by impending administrative action, are you in favor of the current public hearings? Because I feel like the land question has been a long time coming. In as much as I agree with the land compensation without land expropriation without compensation, but we think it's going to further delay the whole process. In the sense that in state versus Mapanya, you know, the Constitutional Court stated that between law and politics, public views may not necessarily inform the view of the judge, whoever it is, who is adjudicating on a particular matter, whenever there is litigation going on. So I'm just interested in knowing what's going to happen, as much as the views of the public are concerned here.
Okay, thank you very much. There's a bit of gender imbalance in all the hands that have been acknowledged. And so I'm going to move to the pink scarf friend over here. Sandisa? Pink scarf, there you are. Oh, there's not a mic this side either.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Nelson Mandela. I am a student at this institution. Firstly, I'd like to thank you very much for your presentation.